Ladies and gentlemen, this is MTGO Traders. My name is Taryn, and this is September 14th for Ixalan preview season. Alright, let's jump right into it, guys. We have Brazen Buccaneers, 3 colorless, 1 red mana for a 2/2 human pirate with haste. When Brazen Buccaneers enters the battlefield, it explores. Of course, explores is reveal the top card of your library, put that card into your hand if it's a land, otherwise put a +1/+1 counter on this creature. Then put that card back on top or put it into your graveyard. A 4 mana with haste that explores, it's a 2/2. I don't even think this will see sealed play. Well, it does have the possibility to be a 3/3 with haste for 4. That's decent. However, if you do just get a land out of this, even the land draw is not that great to me. I think this will probably be a low draft pick. I don't see this seeing any kind of play in standard, modern, EDH, anything like that. This is going to be strictly a draft or sealed pick, and it's going to be like the last card you pick. Moving on up, we have Desperate Castaways, 1 colorless, 1 black mana for a 2/3 human pirate. Desperate Castaways can't attack unless you control an artifact. This card is super interesting. A 2/3 for 2 is very good in draft and sealed, and since we have a lot of treasure artifacts being thrown around in that format, I think this card might see a lot of play. It's a common, so it's going to be seen quite frequently. My thing is, I think it might be in an artifact deck in standard because it is a 2/3 for 2, which is quite good if you're going aggressive. Could we see maybe a Rakdos artifact deck? That's a possibility. Besides that though, I think this card is going to be pretty decent in draft and sealed if you can get your treasure or artifact strategy working. Moving on up to Direfleet Hoarder, 1 colorless, 1 black mana for a 2/1 human pirate. When Direfleet Hoarder dies, create a colorless treasure artifact token with, again, tap, sack this artifact, add 1 mana of any color to your mana pool. So here, right here between Desperate Castaways and Direfleet Hoarder, we have the ability to play Direfleet Hoarder on the first turn. If it dies, we can actually attack with our Desperate Castaways the next turn, stuff like that. I like that ability. I like the ability to give mana once this card dies. A 2/1 for 2 is not great, but it's not bad, and it does generate mana once it dies, so that is good for us. So I think in draft and sealed, it might be picked fairly evenly. I don't think this will see play in standard or anything else like that, but I do think in draft and sealed, it's probably going to be in like the mid-tier range of picks. Moving on up, we have Kinjalli's Collar for 1 white mana. It's a 0/3 human cleric. Dinosaur spells you cast cost 1 colorless less to cast. This card is actually quite good, and probably going to see play in a standard dinosaur deck, just for the fact that it can make the dinosaurs cheaper. I don't really know about this card for a draft or sealed deck. It is a 0/3 for 1, so that is relevant. But unless you're getting into a lot of dinosaurs in your deck, then this card is kind of a nothing. So I wouldn't see this being picked highly in draft or sealed unless you're really into the dinosaur tribal mix there. And I think in standard, this might be brewed around in a standard dinosaur deck. So that's really good to know. Moving on, we have Skullduggery, which is an amazing name. 1 black mana for an instant. Until end of turn, target creature you control gets +1/+1, and target creature in opponent's control gets -1/-1. So this is an interesting card. It's basically Subtle Strike, but for 1 less mana, and that is great. I think this card is a combat trick bomb in the sealed and draft environment. I don't think this will see any kind of play in standard, but it is one of those really cool combat tricks where 2 points does make a difference. So we could possibly see that in a standard deck, but I don't think so. I think this is probably just going to be a very nice draft and sealed combat trick. Moving on up, we have a card that needs translating. This is Rigging Runner, 1 red mana for a 1/1 goblin pirate with first strike. It also has raid. Rigging Runner enters the battlefield with a +1/+1 counter on it if you attacked with a creature this turn. I think this card is actually quite good, honestly. In draft and sealed, this is going to be a bomb for the 1 mana slot that is going to make opponents attacking into you a hellish nightmare. And I think in standard, this card is probably going to see play in a Ramen Up Red build somewhere. I think having a 1 mana 2/2 with first strike is ridiculous. So there's no way I don't see the possibility of this being in a very aggressive either Rakdos or mono red build in standard. This might even see play in modern, but again, we'll have to just wait and see. But again, that ability to have a 2/2 for 1 first striker is quite good. Also, it's a goblin, so it can work in your goblin tribal deck too, though that's awesome. Moving on up, we have Tilani's Knight, 1 colorless, 1 red mana for a 2/2 human knight. Whenever Tilani's Knight attacks, if you control a dinosaur, Tilani's Knight gets +1/+1 until end of turn. So a 2/2 for 2 that can possibly be a 3/3 for 2 if you have a dinosaur on the field. I think that's great. Again, the only problem is, and the caveat is, of course, if you have a dinosaur on the field. So in draft and sealed, if you're getting into a lot of dinosaurs, then this is going to be a no-brainer to put into your deck. If you're not, however, this is just a 2/2 for 2, which is just a bear. And sometimes you need those in draft and sealed for a final pick, but otherwise, I wouldn't really pick this highly. I think in standard, this card is probably not going to go anywhere, but in draft and sealed, if you're into the dino deck, then you definitely want to put this in your deck as well. Moving on up, we have Emissary of Sunrise, 2 colorless, 1 white mana for a 2/1 human cleric with first strike, all these first strike creatures. When Emissary of Sunrise enters the battlefield, it explores. This card is very interesting. I think it's on curve, which means it's a 2/1 for 3 with first strike. I think that's decent itself, but it also has the ability to become a 3/2 with first strike if you do not get into a land, so that is very good. And of course, if you don't get into a land, you just get a land, so that's nice too. I think this card has the capacity to be a great beater in the draft and sealed environment. I don't think this will be seen in standard at all. Of course, it has to pass the standard test to even pass the modern test, so I think this card is just going to be relegated to sealed and draft. Moving on up, we have another card that needs to be translated. This is Field of Ruin. It's a land you can tap for colorless mana, and you can pay 2 and tap it. Sacrifice Field of Ruin, destroy target non-basic land an opponent controls. Each player searches his or her library for a basic land, puts it onto the battlefield, then shuffles his or her library. Note that it says puts it on the battlefield, not tapped. I think this is going to be the card in Draft and Sealed that's going to be killing those flip lands. So if someone has a flip land in Draft and Sealed, this will be the way to kill it, definitely. I'm not so sure about Standard. Unless those flip cards do take off, I think this card might be in the sideboard play, or might just be a one-of in a Standard deck, just like how Scavenger Grounds is right now. I think this card has potential, but it is definitely a worse Ghost Quarter in that you have to pay 2 mana, but it does give you the ability to search for your own land as well, so that's very good. Even Ghost Quarter doesn't give you that, and I think that's a positive there. So this card might be played with. I think it will probably be put into a sideboard maybe somewhere instead of a main board, or maybe just a one-of in a main board. But in Draft and Sealed, this is definitely the situation to turn off those flip lands. So moving on up, we have Lightning Rig Crew for 2 colorless and 1 red mana for a 0/5. Wow. Goblin Pirate. You can tap it. Lightning Rig Crew deals 1 damage to each opponent. Whenever you cast a pirate spell, untap Lightning Rig Crew. That is awesome. Not only is this card able to block turn over turn thanks to its huge butt, the ability here to have a 1 point of damage go to your opponent every single time you play a spell is relevant. I don't think it's relevant enough to be draft or sealed playable, but I think in a really brewable standard deck, this will probably find a home. The ability, though, if you can get it off 3 to 4 times in draft and sealed, might be relevant, but we'll just have to wait and see for that. But I think this is probably just a simple kitchen table card for standard, just to be brewed around with. So I think it's a fun card. I love the art, and I love that it's a 0/5. That's probably the reason it's going to get picked a lot in draft and sealed, just that alone. Moving on up, we have Perilous Voyage, 1 colorless, 1 blue mana for an instant. Return target non-land permanent you don't control to its owner's hand. If its converted mana cost was 2 or less, scry 2. This is an interesting card. It's basically Into the Royal, but that card has you draw a card, where this card has you scry 2, so it's a little bit different, and the requirement's a little bit different. Instead of being kicked, it's just 2 mana cost or less, so that's interesting. I think this is going to be a fantastic removal spell in draft and in sealed, and this might see some weird standard play in a control setup. I'm not so sure, but the ability to scry 2 is quite powerful, even when you're bouncing another non-land permanent, so that's very relevant for us. I think we'll probably see this in draft, sealed, and standard. Moving on up, we have Raider's Wake, 3 colorless, 1 black mana for an enchantment. Whenever an opponent discards a card, that player loses 2 life. It has rate at the beginning of your end step. If you attack with a creature this turn, target opponent discards a card. Now, if you guys know, I've been talking about there being a really good discard outlet deck in standard at the moment, especially when it hits rotation. I think it's just going to get better and better. And this card right here basically says, hey, well, you should play that deck. Being an ability, if you mind rot your opponent, they're losing 2 cards and 4 life. So that is incredibly important. I think this deck is going to be a lot more real once Ixalan releases. So I think this is going to be a card. I think this will be a great card in draft and sealed if you do have an aggressive strategy. But in standard, this card itself is going to be a great brew around card for standard. Moving on up, we have Ruthless Knave. 2 colorless, 1 black mana for a 3/2 orc pirate. You can pay 2 and 1 black mana, sacrifice a creature, create 2 colorless treasure artifact tokens with tap, sacrifice this artifact, add 1 mana of any color to your mana pool. Sacrifice 3 treasures, and you can draw a card. Again, Revel in Riches, guys. I think that's going to be a deck. This card is actually quite good. I think in the sealed and draft environment, a 3/2 for 3 is decent, and I think the ability to create treasure artifacts by sacking creatures is also good. So, not so hot on the sack 3 treasures draw card, but I think it might be relevant if the game does go long. So this is probably going to be like a mid to low pick for me for draft and sealed. And I think standard, this probably won't see play unless it's going to be brewed around into a weird like Revel in Riches deck. So just see it for there. But I think in draft and sealed, this is just a decent 3/2 for 3. And it has a decent effect if your creature's going to die anyway. So that's nice. Moving up to the first rare, we have Deathgorge Scavenger. 2 colorless, 1 green mana for a 3/2 dinosaur. Whenever Deathgorge Scavenger enters the battlefield or attacks, you may exile target card from a graveyard. If a creature creature card is exiled this way, you gain 2 life. If a non-creature card is exiled this way, Deathgorge Scavenger gets +1/+1 until end of turn. I'm not really a fan of this card. It's kind of weird that it's a rare for me. I think it's a rare because it has such an interesting ability, but I'm not hot on this card. A 3/2 for 3 with this kind of ability, even though it has the ability to make itself a 4/3, is still not that great for me. I think in Draft and Sealed, this might be one of those rares where you want to pick an uncommon instead of this card. So a 3/2 for 3 is not terrible, but it's not great, and its ability exiles cards from your graveyard, so then this card is probably just going to suck your graveyard dry or die in the process. So not a fan of it, so don't trust it and don't play it in Standard. Moving on up, we have another card that needs to be translated. This is Fleet Swallower. It's 5 colorless, 2 blue mana for a 6/6 fish. Whenever Fleet Swallower attacks, target opponent puts a top half of his or her library into his or her graveyard rounded up. That's crazy. With the Zendikar and Innistrad Plains rotating out, the mill strategy was losing a lot of pieces. But if the mill strategy can last long enough to play this card and be able to get a swing in on it, then they're going to be just fine. I think this might see play in a Simic mill strategy in Standard. I think in Draft and Sealed, if the game goes long enough, this card is insanity. Basically like a mini Ulamog, and that's insane. But if you pull this in Draft and Sealed, golf clap for you guys. This card is awesome in that format. It's a total bomb. And I think, again, in Standard, it's probably going to see play in a weird Simic like Fog Mill deck, so that's going to be interesting to see. Moving on up, we have another card that needs to be translated. This is Redoubled Volley. 1 colorless, 2 red mana for a sorcery. Redoubled Volley deals 3 damage to target creature or player. It has Raid, and you can pay 3 colorless and 2 more red mana. Return Redoubled Volley from your graveyard to your hand. Activate this ability only if you attacked with a creature this turn. This is a repeating burn spell for Draft and Sealed, and that is awesome. This is basically a more conditional Hammer of Borgadon, and that's just fine for me. In Draft and Sealed, this card will be a card that will probably return to your hand multiple times in order to burn your opponent to a crisp. In Standard, though, this is just a lot of mana to sink into a single card, so I don't see that seeing any kind of play in that format. Maybe in EDH, this card has some use, as you can basically get into infinite mana sometimes in EDH, so that is something to look at. But I think for Draft and Sealed, this is probably just going to be a 3 mana burn spell for 3, and that's just fine. All right, moving on, we have Shadowed Caravel. This is 2 colorless for a 2/2 vehicle. Whenever a creature you control explores, put a +1/+1 counter on Shadowed Caravel. It also has crew for 2, which is interesting. It's no Sky Skiff with being able to fly and having 2, 3, and crew 1, so it's not that great, but it is better in that it can become larger as the game progresses, so that is interesting. I think this card in Draft and Sealed is okay, especially if you get to explore quite a bit. In Standard, though, this just dies to an Abrade outright, so if it stays on the battlefield long enough to be large enough to start attacking in, it's probably going to die to a removal spell, so that is kind of sad to me. But moving on up, we have Sword Point Diplomacy, 2 colorless, 1 black mana for a sorcery. Reveal the top 3 cards of your library. For each of those cards, put that card into your hand unless your opponent pays 3 life. Then exile the rest. This card, I feel like, is quite good and will probably see Standard play. In Draft and Sealed, you could actually ping your opponent for 9 just for 3 mana, which is amazing. But more often than not, they're just going to let you draw 3 cards, and that's fine. Black card draw is extremely relevant, and I think this will be seen play in a lot of Standard decks until rotation. So definitely keep this in mind. I think this card is awesome. The Punisher mechanic here really does punish your opponent, so this is interesting for me. Moving on, we have another card. It's Vance's Blasting Cannons. This is a 3 colorless and 1 red mana for a legendary enchantment. At the beginning of your upkeep, exile the top card of your library. If it's a non-land card, you may cast that card this turn. Whenever you cast your 3rd spell in a turn, you may transform Vance's Blasting Cannons. This name is insane. Flipping it does turn it into Spitfire Bastion. It's a legendary land. You can add 1 red mana to your mana pool, and you can pay 2 colorless and 1 red mana to tap it. Spitfire Bastion deals 3 damage to target creature or player. This is one of those cards where it's kind of like a magical Christmas land version of Magic. Casting 3 spells in a single turn is quite difficult, but you could see this maybe in some weird aggressive strategy. I'm not exactly sure. Maybe in like a blue-red burn deck or something like that. That would be really interesting. Having the ability to cast the top card of your library, having the ability to exile the top card of your library and cast it is nice, and it basically means you're digging for 2 instead of for 1, so that is interesting. But in Draft and Sealed, this card seems to be like it's going to be too slow, and in Standard, this is kind of a magical Christmas land card where you're going to be casting lots of cards in a single turn. So I don't feel like that's going to be happening unless it's like some weird burn strategy. So this is a card I would kind of stay away from. If it does flip, though, however, it does 3 damage to target creature or player for 3 mana, and that is relevant. But again, the flip condition for it is ridiculous. Unless you're in a very aggressive, fast, low to the ground deck, you won't be casting 3 spells in a single turn. So it just breaks this card for me, and I don't really like it. But moving on, we have Axis of Mortality. It's 4 colorless and 2 white mana for an enchantment. At the beginning of your upkeep, you may have 2 target players exchange life totals. This card has EDH written all over it. This could also be very good in a Second Sons deck in Standard where you're trying to outlast your opponent. So you're flogging your opponent turn over turn. They've got you down to 4 life. Oh, well, they still have 20. I'm going to cast Axis of Mortality. Our lives switch, and now I have 20 life and you have 4 or whatever. So I think that's interesting. This might be a really cool game ender in Draft and Sealed if you get into that. But the first thing that strikes me with this card is that it's going to be playable in EDH forever. It's just a ton of fun. But that does it for the spoilers today. Let me know what you think. Do you like the cards that are coming out of Ixalan? Do you think the power level is high enough to compete with what's in Standard right now? Or do you think it's kind of like going down? I feel like some of the vehicles coming out in Ixalan are lower power level than what they were in Kaladesh or Aether Revolt. So WotC is probably afraid of the crew mechanic now. As some of the cards in Kaladesh and Aether Revolt are definitely a lot better. So we just got to see what's going to happen in the future. Again, the set is nearly out now, so the more cards that come out, the more I'm excited to see this in Sealed and Draft. So like the video if you liked it, and subscribe to MTGO Traders for more content like this every single week. I will see you guys in the next video.